Here's a question for you. What do Bitcoin, this tie, and this cannonball have in common? You might be able to guess the answer, but in case you haven't, what these three things have in common is energy. Now I'm going to explain in this video why it's important to keep these similarities in mind and why it's important to keep energy in mind when it comes to understanding why Bitcoin is important. Energy is how we determine who owns what. Energy is how we live, right? You need oxygen to breathe. Without oxygen, you're going to die in a couple minutes. Without water, you're going to die in a couple days. Without food, you're going to die in a couple weeks, right? Without sleep, you're going to die, in a few days or maybe a couple weeks if you really can get by, right? Sleep is the recovery of energy. You need shelter, you need heat. Everything that comes to your survival comes down to energy. And so, because the currency of life itself is energy among all living things, this is how status and reputation and authority and value are equated across living things. A lion, if we think about a lion that roams Africa, how does a lion communicate to other lions or lionesses or any animal how powerful said lion is? They communicate it through their mane, right? They have all this hair around them, these big African cats, and they're communicating, they're projecting influence, saying, I, as a lion, control so much energy that I can expend the energy to create this mane. I have enough calories consumed in a day. I have control of my territory. I have enough water. I am healthy and fit enough that I can manage to show the world this is how much energy I have that I can afford to spend it. Another great example is a peacock. What a peacock does, in many ways, is the same thing with the males at least, is that, hey, I'm a successful male peacock. I am able to have enough energy, food, water, shelter, heat that I can survive, and I am worthy of mating. I am worthy of your respect and adoration, right? This same thing that the birds of paradise, right? You've seen the videos online of these birds in South America that do all these elaborate dances. Why do these birds do this? Why do animals do these kinds of mating rituals? It's because it's a way of communicating, hey, females, or hey, males, I have enough energy. I clear this area. I did my dance. I have my colors. I have my hair or feathers or whatever it is. I'm channeling energy, and you should, reproduce with me because I can therefore successfully have offspring. And humans are no different. Now, there are many ways in which humans do this. Humans can do this physically, right? Men typically we like to have big muscles, of which I don't, but that's something that men like to do. Why are muscles perceived as attractive by women? Muscles and a good stature, height, these things are attractive in men because they project to women that, hey, I have physical strength, I have energy, I have the ability to protect children. Likewise, typically, traditionally speaking, women with long hair, for men, they perceive it in the same way, right? That if she's able to have that long hair, healthy hair, these are all signals, ways of communicating energy, of projecting power, energy, force. It is the fundamental currency of the universe. And we do that with our clothes too, right? That's getting into this tie here, right? Obviously, it's orange for, Bitcoin, orange coin. But, that's why in various cultures at various times, we go to elaborate lengths to have strange clothing rituals and traditions that we pass generation to generation. These cultural things organically arise. Whatever the local culture is, whatever the scarce, rare commodity is, the more you have of that scarce, rare commodity that took energy to acquire, the more you have of that, the more successful you're perceived, right? That is ideal for finding a spouse. It's ideal for raising kids and in job promotions, right? In all aspects of life, the human that has the most ability to channel energy, or at least the most perceived ability to channel energy, generally is going to get the better opportunities and have everything of that sort, right? Like, for example, I am throwing energy at you with throwing my words. And I'd like to think I'm doing it at least moderately succinctly and articulate in a good form, right? It's because it took a lot of proof of work in here to be able to communicate information, to be able to come up with things off the fly, to be able to come up with all kinds of metaphors. Wow, that this cannonball's really heavy. I'll get to that more in a minute, though. But basically, even my words spoken to you are a way of projecting energy, right? I'm projecting intellectual energy to you. This tie is status. It shows that I have enough energy. I go out into the world. I can afford this tie, and I can wear it, and I spend enough energy every morning preparing myself and getting my hair cut and trimmed nice. Just like a lion, has their mane, trimmed and pruned and presentable, right? Suits, ties, dresses, all these things we do to communicate energy. Clothing is a way of projecting energy. And speaking of projecting energy, that's where we come to these. What are these? In the same way that animals project energy throughout their physical bodily movements, and humans the same way with their muscles or their height or their shapes. It's the same thing with projecting money, or excuse me, projecting value in society as a whole instead of the individual level, right? So in the society as a whole, how does the society project energy, right? Basically, you can think of weapons as the form of ties that we have, right? Why does the United States have such a massive military if we're not really at war? I mean, obviously, we're in a various series of proxy wars right now. We have been for a very long period of time. But that aside, if we're not in a direct all out war with Europe or China or Japan or whomever or Russia, like if we're not in an all out direct war, why do we have more than enough weapons for World War III multiple times over? It's because we have to project power. We have to project force. If I'm going to be the lion that maintains control of my territory, I have to enforce that and spend energy in this mane, right? The military is that form of mane. Think of deer, right? I'm not in Africa. I'm here in Michigan where it's quite dark and cold. We don't have lions, but we do have deer. And bucks, they expend energy in their racks, right? They have antlers that is a way of projecting force. It's like, an 8-point buck versus a 6-point buck, right? The older they are, the more energy they channel, the bigger, the stronger they are, the more food they've been able to consume, right? The more territory they have control over and everything, the bigger their antlers, and therefore, the more mates they get and the bigger reputation they have in deer, right? Energy is the fundamental currency of all animals, right? And so, in the same way that the deer has antlers, in the same way that the business person has a tie, in the same way that the intellectual has words, or in the same way that a wealthy person has money, which will get more into money second. That's what these weapons are. This rock right here, I took this rock when I went to Israel. I went to Israel and Palestine, relatively recently, and obviously many of you watching this, probably most of you watching this, are familiar with the story of David and Goliath. you know if we're going to think about that on the terms of channeling energy, why was Goliath this massive character in the story? Is because he was able to channel more energy. See, with the Philistines, the Goliath's army, or the army Goliath was in, the Philistines had a better form of energy than the Israelites. David, the Israelites had a weaker form of armor. They did not have iron and other materials in the same way that the Philistines had, so they had better armor, bigger swords, and obviously Goliath himself was big, right? Having a big mane, projecting himself, or a metaphorical mane. And so you have the Israelites that do not have the energy competing with the Philistines. And I've been to that valley where this battle occurred. And actually, if you go to the different sites, you go to one side and you see the archaeological digs and the holes in the ground where they dig up the Israelite side, and you dig up the Philistine side. It's actually really fascinating. I won't get into that now because I suspect many of you be bored. But the point is, this rock, as small as it is, I can hold a hand. A rock, maybe a couple of times large in the size, and maybe the size, I don't know. Obviously, nobody knows. But a rock similar to this, a few thousand years ago, was slung in a slingshot. And even though this was a smaller amount of energy, a smaller amount of mass in this rock, projected forward, hitting the lion in the head is what killed him, right? And so it's not only the amount of energy that's important, it's the concentrated amount of energy that's important. Even though David had orders of magnitude less energy in form of muscles, swords, armor than Goliath did, just taking a smaller amount of energy and channeling it in the precise right spot, either here or there, or wherever it was in Goliath's head, it killed him, knocked him out, a single shot, right? And this, give it a few thousand years of technological innovation, and we get to this. This is a cannonball from the American Civil War. I'm a big history, nerd, ancient history, more recent history. I love it all. But point is, this is a cannonball from the American Civil War. I've owned this for a few years, actually almost a decade now. But point is that this cannonball is the same idea here, right? If you're gonna shoot this at a ship or at a person or at a group of people or have it hit the ground, and explode, right? Whatever the case, you are taking a relatively small amount of energy and concentrating it, channeling it, and pushing it forward, right? It's not, in the same way that a deer with their antlers, you don't want the antlers to be blunt. You want the energy to be forced together, right? And that's the same idea of a cannonball, right? It's the same idea with the tip of a sword, the tip of a spear, tip of an arrow. You want your energy to be concentrated in the ideal spot to inflict the most damage. I mean, offense, defense, you could think of it the same way, right? I mean, are cannons an offensive or defensive weapon, right? I mean, yes, you have cannons to shoot at the enemy when you're attacking, but at the same time, you have the cannons as your metaphorical tie here, communicating that don't attack me. So then it's kind of a form of defense too, or at least not defense, but lowering the incentive for attack, let's say. And so, in the same way, energy is a currency for all animals. In the same way, that energy is the way at which we defend the resources we have, whether it's the ancient world where we're dealing with rocks and chariots and spears, or it's the recent modern world, which is still technologically ancient. This one, it's still the same thing. And this gets back to the larger point I continue to make online repeatedly, is that we have less in common with the future than the past. Okay, this is the 1860s. Okay, this is multiple this is thousands of years ago, okay, BC. All right, this technologically speaking are the same thing, except are you using a piece of leather for a slingshot, or are you using iron and gunpowder for a cannon, right? Obviously it's a massive upgrade, and the exponential curve between this in those few thousand years, there was less, at any point in there was less in common with the future at their time than their past, right? You have slingshots for thousands of years, and then suddenly, with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, now you have the Gatling gun, now you have the cannons, now you've also, now you've canister rounds, all sorts of innovations in the Civil War that led to a lot of death. This is a massive innovation compared to this. But in terms of our technology, the more modern world of today, of 2024, both of these are ancient technology. And this is where we get to Bitcoin. We've talked about the tie, we've talked about the cannonball, and now we talk about Bitcoin. In the same way, I would argue Bitcoin is a similar upgrade. This to the nuclear bomb. The nuclear bomb is that antler. It is that cannonball. The nuclear bomb takes a large amount of energy and concentrates it into a single pinnacle. In the same way, this takes a large amount of energy from the whole explosion of the cannon into a singular point of fire. The nuclear bomb on a larger scale does the same thing. You have a massive explosion from a very, very tiny device. And see, that's what most people don't understand with the end of World War II. Japan did not surrender because America created the atomic bomb. Japan surrendered because the atomic bomb was so efficient. See, in history classes, we often talk about how Hiroshima and Nagasaki, oh, so many people died, it was horrible. But then we completely look over the reality that, we bombed numerous cities in Japan. And in fact, many of these fires in the months and years leading up to the nuclear bomb itself killed just as many, if not more people, right? We think that, oh, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were just so devastating with death counts they'd never seen before. Like, no, actually, they weren't that much more. The difference is it was much more concentrated. Instead of having 1,000 planes doing 100 rounds, each dropping, 100 bombs in each round or whatever, you have one bomb from one plane. That's the difference. It's not that the amount of energy was different or that the death count was higher. It's that the amount of destruction for the amount of energy exerted was entirely different. It's the same ideas here. So the nuclear bomb is our modern form of the cannonball, and the cannonball was the modern form of David's slingshot. And so when it comes to understanding why Bitcoin's important as money and why you should consider getting off zero and self-custodying it properly, is because Bitcoin is the nuclear bomb of these weapons, right? I mean, if you're going to think this is the money, the metaphorical money of the ancient world, right? You're going to save your energy in your basalt house and your goats and your cows and your children. Your children are your inheritance. Your children are your retirement plan. If you don't have your 401k and your bonds in your modern economy, Your children are your inheritance. The livestock, that's your inheritance. The fields of which you grow your crop, that's your inheritance, right? And then if we go out to the 1860s, just about 150 years ago, if we go out to then, how do you store your energy? Well, a bar of gold. Okay, it's not that different than here. You save your energy in silver and copper, you save it in gold. Yes, it's a massive upgrade. Obviously, there's multiple orders of magnitude of energy increase between this and that. However, both the savings mechanisms, the concentrated energy of 1860 and the savings mechanisms and concentrated energy of thousands of years ago, both are ancient in terms of the technology of the modern era. And that's what Bitcoin is. Cows are relatively scarce. Okay, bonds and stocks are relatively scarce. Yes, bonds and stocks and gold are orders of magnitude better and more concentrated at channeling energy because they're much harder to dilute. The reason why stocks and gold are much better savings vehicles than goats and wheat is because they're much more concentrated energy, right? Again, that's the idea with the stone and the cannonball here. They're much more concentrated energy because you're not constantly diluting and debasing energy. It's much harder to create and mine more gold than it is to say, breed a bunch of goats and cows, right? The cows and goats will help you with that, and they will be heavily incentivized to help you with that. So the point is, in the same way that these relatively scarce assets of the previous decades and centuries are orders of magnitude better than this, that is the difference of Bitcoin. And I would argue the difference is actually much more dramatic. In the same way that on the scale of a nuclear bomb, a stone or a cannonball are basically the same. That's the same thing here. People will look at Bitcoin and say, "Oh, well, it might be as valuable as this market or that market. The market cap might get." It's like my emphasis and the reason why I continue to come from this first principles energy standpoint instead of coming at you with a bunch of charts and lines on a chart telling you what Bitcoin price is going to go to in the short term. The reason I try to explain from these first principles thinking is how do you price the cannonball? Man, this thing is heavy, by the way. Like, this may not look heavy, but I don't know if you ever held a cannonball, from whatever era, but these things are really heavy. A lot heavier than a solid rock. That's for sure. It's crazy. But in the same way, how do you price David Slingshot, or excuse me, how do you price the cannonball of General Grant's army or General Sherman's army? How do you price that in terms of slingshots? Like, right? And likewise, how do you price both of those together in terms of the nuclear bomb, in terms of Hiroshima, right? I mean, it's completely impriceable. It's impossible to do it because you can do things with the cannonball you can never do with the slingshot. This will never shoot as far as this will because this is a much more concentrated form of energy. You will never be able to harm or hurt or protect yourself as much with this as you will be able with this. And the nuclear bomb, in similar ways, compared to both these, can do things that these things technologically fundamentally cannot do because their energy simply is not there. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is priceless in terms of political currency units. Even though political currency units are better than having an economic system based on salt and Sumerian tablets, yes, political currency units are better, and I do get flack for saying that, but it's true. Political currency is better than complete barter, but both of these are completely, let me set that down, both both of those are completely ancient in terms of Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the infinitely concentrated pinnacle of energy. It is like this cannon with an infinitely smaller and smaller, and more concentrated cannonball, right? Because it is actually digitally scarce. It is not artificially scarce like the bonds, stocks, investment, real estate, and cows and everything else, and gold and silver and metals. It's actually finitely scarce. Zero inflation rate compared to all those things with some inflation rate, right? Because that means all of a sudden time is irrelevant. If I give you a couple different satellites, or let's forget satellites, ships. You have 100 ships. Some sink at 10% a year, right? That would be the more ancient forms, the less ideal forms of monetary energy and storage. Other ships sink at 2% a year, maybe like gold, right? That's much better. That's a huge upgrade. I mean, if you do the exponential math yourself, the compounding effect or the compounding rate of death of the ship that's sinking at 10% a year versus the one that's sinking at 2% a year, it's dramatic. It's incredible. And we look back at this and laugh because this is so much better, but then we forget that The only thing that's better is the 0% rate of decay. If the ship never sinks, not even a single percent in a year, well, then it's going to float forever. And so that's what Bitcoin is. And that's why Bitcoin is priceless, because it is the ship that floats forever. When people say Bitcoin's going up forever, it's not because it's some hopium thing of day trading trying to, take your profits into dollars. Like, and people don't understand that. They're like, oh, you just want Bitcoin to go to $100 million so you can take your fiat profits. It's like, no, Bitcoin going up forever is the same thing as saying this ship can float. We've never had a ship that can float before. Do you understand, ancient Phoenicians or whoever you are? Do you understand the significance? Oh, but why would I ever want to go on water? Everything I ever needs on land. You can't live on water. It's like you're trying to explain, no, we can trade with people on other land masses. Oh, but that's too expensive. It's the same kind of mentality here. And whether we're talking about nuclear bombs or ties that you wear on your shirt or muscles that, jacked gym bros, everything comes to energy. Ships, cannonballs, Bitcoin, money itself, all these things come down to energy. And once you understand energy, and once you understand that Bitcoin is the best form of monetary energy we have created because it is the most concentrated in the same way that a cannonball or a deer's antlers are concentrated in a single pinnacle point, then you will understand why Bitcoin is going up forever.